Alrighty, I believe we shall start now. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining this last webinar of the series. And um, maybe most of you must have joined our sessions, the 6 session series that we have. So today is the webinar that we have. We thought to create an epilogue just to summarize and conclude all our webinar series. So before I start, I would like to extend from my side and from Saul as well, thanks to Shaun. Shaun has been instrumental and a big support for us in all the webinars. Unfortunately, he is not here today, and so I have to play his role. So hopefully I can justify his role. All right, first of all, acknowledgement of the country. The BCI in Australasia would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. We as a chapter are committed to honoring Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' unique cultural and spiritual relationships to the land, waters, and seas, and their rich contribution to society. Just from the safety point of view, whenever you are from wherever you are joining, please ensure that you are familiar with your exit points and all other instructions that you have for that building or facility. So please follow the directions of the fire wardens, just in case if you end up having an emergency event. Hopefully not. As we mentioned, I mentioned earlier, we had a series of 6 webinars. Now today we are concluding. So just a declaration that we, the Australasian chapter, have delivered a series of webinars designed to introduce and explore different standards. And thanks to Saul for sharing his wisdom and knowledge in all those sessions. These sessions were never intended to provide comprehensive training or to cover every detail of the standards or the relationship with GPG, the Good Practice Guide 7.0. Most importantly, they are not a substitute for the formal BCI training available through our licensed training partners. So today's epilogue brings our series to a close. So the goal is to look back at what we have learned together, highlight the most valuable takeaways, and reflect on how the shared experiences and the tips can be applied in practices moving forward. And one of the reasons that why we decided this, because having limited time in those sessions, we may not, I think in some webinars, we were not able to answer all your questions. And then this is more like an open discussion so that you can bring your challenges, your questions, we can learn from you. And then of course, we can share our knowledge and our experience in business continuity. And for if anyone is interested in a formal training, then of course these are the trainings available and the information is available on the BCI website. So this is being provided by the licensed training partners of BCI. Just from housekeeping perspective, if please turn on your camera if you like, and then of course microphone muted if you're not talking, because sometimes there could be a noise at your back. And then please, as I said, ask as many questions as you have, but then again, with some restriction of time, since we have multiple stages of the life cycle or the standards, we propose like maybe 8 to 10 minutes per standard. And that's basically it. So now, so these were the webinars that we covered, just as summary of like introduction to 22301, then 22317 on BIA, 22331 strategy, and 22318 on supply chain, 22332 on plans and procedures, and finally 22336 on resilience policy. So let's start with ISO 22301. And then as requested, let's stick to 8 to 10 minutes, but please come up with your questions. So I'll leave it with Saul. Apologies, I did not introduce myself and Saul with an assumption that you know us, but then again, myself Wasim Malik, based out of Sydney, Australia. Been with the BCI for more than 20 years now, and based and a founder and a principal and the CEO for Risk Professionals. Over to you, Saul.
Wasim, thank you. And thanks for the introduction and standing in for Shaun. Sometimes it's a tough act to follow because he does it so well. So for those of you who don't know me, welcome. So yes, I'm Saul. I joined the BCI in the mid to late 90s. my membership number is actually 148, if that means anything to people. So right at the beginning of the BCI, I have been a consultant in this space for over 30 years, and 2.5 years ago, I decided to leave consultancy or consulting and join AGL. So I'm the full-time employee of AGL. I'm Senior Manager Business Resilience, and basically take all my history and I bring it to AGL. So I think, as Wasim has already indicated, today's really about providing you the opportunity of asking some questions as we step through each of these standards. And again, I think Wasim was being quite polite before when he said that there wasn't enough time to have question time because I speak too much, but I think it's also reflective of the content of those standards and the challenge in trying to help people understand the benefits of looking in the standard. But I think what I might do is just a quick recap of each of those standards, then come back to 22301, and then maybe take some questions if people have that. So the first session back in January of this year was an introduction to ISO. Being BCI people, we're very much focused on BCI, its structures, and the world we live in. Not many people have great familiarity with the ISO world beyond maybe the core ones of 301 and maybe 317. So I provided an overview and a history of the international standards organizations and an explanation on how those standards relate to each other. And then we spent the second half of that session talking more deeply around 22301. And I think the core aspect of that conversation was really about understanding that 2301 is what I would say a high-level document. It is the requirements document, and it's structured around 98 shall statements that if you are an organization wanting to be certified to 22301, you need to show evidence. You need to comply with all the statements that are structured around a shall. You shall do a BIA, for example. And then if you wanted a little bit more depth around 22301, then you would look in 22313. We didn't touch 22313 in this series. Maybe that's something that we can look at next year, maybe if there's an interest there. But I think you'll understand that 313 is just a peel open of 22301 with a bit more depth. The next session we did was on 22317, which is business impact analysis. And I led that presentation by explaining what the purpose of the BIA is. And in essence, it's the analysis of the effects of a disruption on the organization. And the outcomes of that analysis is a statement and justification of the business continuity priorities and requirements. And we talked through that standard, the technical specification, and highlighted a number of the different techniques that that standard offers in how you can define recovery time objectives. And as it says on the screen there's more than one way to define RTO, and the standard does talk about that. And we stepped through some of those examples on how to think about defining your RTO, your MTPD, and using some of the tools that are defined in the standard. The next session was on 22331, which was all about strategy, business continuity strategy, determination, and selection. And that addresses the outcomes of the BIA and the risk assessment, two separate streams of activity coming together, and it determines how organizations can become more resilient and capable of dealing with a wide range of disruptive incidents. The next session after that was around supply chain management, and technically it's around supply chain continuity management, which extends the principles of business continuity to the management of supplier relationships. We looked at the upstream and downstream relationships with respect to the organization. It focuses on supply of resources and the delivery of products and services. And I also mentioned that it has a very strong relationship with another ISO family of standards around the 28000 series. After that, we looked at plans and procedures. The caption there says, one plan doesn't fit all. And I guess the key message there was to say, it's not about writing one document for everything. You have to define a range of documents to suit your needs. But essentially, the principle of plans and procedures is to detail the actions that your various teams will undertake during a disruption or during a response to a major incident. And the last one was basically a step out of the core family of BC standards. We looked at resilience. We didn't look at 22316, which is organizational resilience, principles and attributes. And the reason why I decided not to do that is because that's currently going through some significant change. Would I call it a rewrite? Probably, but you didn't hear that from me. But it's a major change. And I felt there was no point in really taking you through the current published one, because sometime in the next probably 6 months, we'll have a brand new 22316. And instead, we focus on 22336, which is resilience, policy and strategy, which is relatively new and will last us for the next 5 years. And the principle around 22336 is that it's about policy and strategy. It's a framework on how an organization can better anticipate and respond to change, which includes, technically, by definition, includes acute shocks and long-term stresses, so that it can enable the organization to continue to pursue their business objectives and to survive and prosper. And those notions of surviving and prospering and acute shocks and stresses are kind of like the underpinning elements that we find when we start thinking about resilience, and what differentiates resilience from continuity, which is really a response to a disruption. So that's kind of the journey that we went on over this last year, the last 8.5 months or so. And so I think, as Wasim has suggested, we might go back to the top, go back to 22301 or standards, and just open it up. If you've got a question, maybe put your hand up so we can put you in a sequence, and then we'll take those questions one at a time. Unless no one has any questions around 22301. Okay. Or standards? Any question about ISO? Want a little bit of an update, maybe? No. Maybe I'll give an update anyway. Shall I do that with him, just in terms of some of the key ones?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So just to let everybody know, 22301. Oh, okay. Thanks, Daniela. 22301. We are going through the process at the moment of establishing the systematic review for the standard. It's gone up to the ISO Secretariat, so it's a big deal. And I'm hoping that sometime around January, the process will kick off. It should take about 18 to 24 months to take 22301 through its review. Not giving anything away here, I think, because it's kind of public knowledge. I've been asked to lead that project based on me leading the last one, so they feel that there's good continuity in philosophy and in management. So that's got to be ratified by ISO, and then hopefully they'll say yes, and I will lead that project into 2026 into 2027. I can't tell you what 22301 is going to look like at the end of the process. I'm kind of hoping it'll look more or less the way it does today. I would like to think, but don't nail me on this, that there might be a few less shells than there are. I think there might be too many shells, but again, it's not for me to decide. It's just for me to coordinate and to facilitate. There's 45 countries in the technical committee, and I seek input from all those countries. And I would put it to you, as members of BCI, I am also the BCI's representative on ISO. So if you do have a suggestion, an idea, a concern, if you hate something in there, then send me an email. You'll find me through the BCI website. You can always contact me through there. I've had that already through this series. So send me your questions, send me your ideas. I'll get back to you, and fold that into the conversation with the other countries, and hopefully you can contribute to the improvement of 22301.
Sure.
Does anyone have a question about that process?
Yeah.
Okay. Another one which I'll just pick on because it's kind of hot in my mind. So 22331 strategy, it's on the screen there. That's had a rewrite as well. It's a bit of a restructure. it actually looks really, really good. And that's also going to continue into next year. And hopefully we publish either late 2026 or early 2027. It's a really good step up. I think there was a lot of vagueness around the current version of 331, but this new version looks fantastic. There's been quite a lot of input from a number of countries into improving this standard, which is great. Maybe that's
So
all.
can you share on this the clause related to climate that they have added in all the standards, how they're going to impact, and then how you accommodate it in your plans?
So that was an addendum to
Yeah.
22301. There was 2 sentences that were included in the standard now.
Yeah.
It's a good question. To what extent? I think if I had it my way, and I'm not sure if I do, even though I'm going to be the project leader, I would reposition one of those statements and put it in the strategies part. I actually don't know, because look, between you and me, it's kind of motherhood statement that we need to include, this type of thinking in our standards. So every management system standards had this change made to it.
Exactly. Every standard they have included these two.
Yeah. Or every management system standard has, yes. So we need to look at it on a standard by standard basis to decide how we're going to incorporate, climate change in there. And when I say 22301, it's kind of in the wrong spot. Without going into too much detail, where I'd like to see it is in the strategy, because I think there is an opportunity for organizations to consider the ramifications on climate change when you're thinking about your strategies. So if you are going to set up a relationship with a third-party supplier of some service or product as part of your response and recovery strategy, then I would suggest it's a good idea to go and investigate that organization and find out to what extent that organization, what they're doing in terms of, climate change, the protection of our environment and so on, and maybe make some decisions as to whether that organization is better than other organizations or still sadly lacking in thinking around climate change. I don't think climate change makes any difference to your context, to your BIA assessment, right? Your analysis, but I think it comes into play in your strategies and solutions. But it'll be a case by case basis, I think. And certainly in 22331, a lot of thinking around climate change has gone into that standard in terms of the considerations to be had when you're thinking about your strategies and maybe your risk assessments as well.
That is true. See, the most that I've seen is they have added in the context and maybe some responsibilities from the leadership or some regulatory compliance.
Yeah.
So that's where I have seen mostly added since they have given us this addendum.
I think it would be good. I think it would be good, a better fit to see it in organization resilience, right?
Yeah.
Principles and attributes. Well, we'll see to what extent there is climate related concepts in that stand when it comes out next year.
Sure.
Shall we move to 317?
Yes, please.
So
I mean, again, just a request to everyone, because the whole idea or the design for this epilogue is now to encourage everyone to ask questions, and that's why we did not prepare any slides, because we wanted to generate a discussion, share knowledge with you, and based on your questions, or you can share your challenges. So strongly encourage everyone that if you please unmute yourself and then ask any question or share your challenges.
So actually, there's a message from Jordan that says that he's lodged a question. I can't see it, Jordan.
Yeah, we can't see. Hold on a second. Oh, okay. Let me see. Okay, I got it, Jason. So the question is there an ISO related to the resilience of facilities to natural hazards and technological disruptions that could be utilized to provide a good basis for SOCI Act reporting on the natural hazard disruptions?
There is a standard on critical infrastructure. It's not directly related to SOCI because SOCI is an Australian construct, whereas ISO is global. But I can't see your question because there were components in there, but what you've articulated is a variety of different components, which I think are covered in a variety of different standards rather than just one standard. Oh, yeah, thank you. So facilities, natural hazards, yeah. So natural hazards disruption-related risk is also addressed by some of the risk management standards under the 31,000 family. So IT disruption, technology disruption. So that's an interesting one. There's a blend of that in the 22-300 series. So in strategies and solutions in the new version, there's a very strong focus around technology disruption. And there's also a proposal to create a new standard in the 22-300 series around ICT resilience. Okay, so it's bigger than ITDR. The landscape is broader than that. It's very much a focus on the big picture resilience of technology. That's all I can say. I'm actually not allowed to explain it more than that. So keep an eye out on that. In involvement here, I'm finding so many shortfalls. Well, that's why the technical committee felt it was important to put a proposal up to ISO for this new standard. There is one in the 27,000 series, 27031, but my opinion is it falls very short of the broader aspect of resilience. So you could take a look at that. It's a little bit of a rewrite from an old one, which is 10 years old. I don't really think it's, I think they could have done more with it than what they did. But in any case, the technical committee that I belong to, TC292, we're putting this proposal up for a new standard, and we will find out hopefully in the next 4 to 8 weeks whether that proposal has been accepted. But ISO works very slowly. So sorry, Jordan, you'll have to wait a little while. And as far as being involved, let's just see how it goes first, and then we can have a chat maybe. Yes, me too, Daniela. Any other questions? All right, so maybe given we're timing, let's move on to 317, so BIA. So the BIA presentation spent about half the time just talking about different techniques on how to define RTO, the relationship with MTPD, and then towards the end there was a little bit of a dive into a technique that helps you, I'll call it, normalize the results by using trend analysis. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions about that or any observations or any concerns. Happy to hear it. Happy to yeah, I'll just throw it open. Come off mic if you hand. I think Jordan, you've got your hand up. If you want to just turn your mic back on. Oh, okay. No questions about BIA. Okay. No worries. Thanks, Jordan. Okay.
Maybe just a question to them that have you ever combined your BIA and BCP together?
Actually, Jordan's just popped up a message to say that no one can unmute themselves.
Oh, really? Let me see if I can.
Jesse's got a question. With the new SOCI Act requirements, do you think we need to tighten and have consistent methodology to conduct BIAs? That's a good question. Part of me says, do we have inconsistency now? Do we talk about these terms differently, or is it really just this fundamental difference between the construct of impact and consequence that creates a bit of confusion? Look, I think bottom line, when it comes to methodology and terminology, I think, yes, we should have a consistent approach here. So yes. Well, it's a good question. I might have a conversation with our SOCI team to see if they've struggled with that. I know certainly at AGL, when I've been leading the business continuity work and the BIA, that kind of sits above any other work that's going on, sitting above, the SOCI work as well. And so they kind of look to the BIA just to confirm that we've identified the critical parts of our organisation and that we've got continuity plans around that. But there's been no confusion raised to me internally here, but that's not to say others don't. So, Paul, we have only for internal facing teams. I'm not sure what that means, Paul. Can you come off speaker oh, you're off speaker? No, let's put you off. Let's unmute you.
The unmute is working.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So what do you mean by that?
Oh, this was answering a earlier question.
Okay.
Which do you have any BIA and BCPs merged? And the only situation where we do that for our organization is where we have internal facing teams with very little critical processes involved. So the BIA and BCP merging is more to do with reducing admin work and allowing them to have a smaller amount of emphasis on analysis, because the common controls and mitigations tested by lots of other groups are covered, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think there's another dynamic too that also allows people to merge them as well, and that's where you're in a mature environment and you don't really need to spend time on strategies and solutions, that you've got really good workarounds in place, and so you just write them straight into the plan. And so you bring your BIA, you bring your workarounds, and you pop them into the plan. It saves another step in the process.
Yeah, we've got to that point in the sense of 80% of the BCP is part of the template now, which makes things a bit easier.
Yeah.
Because the strategies are already there, and the resilience in some of our IT systems are already there. So
yeah,
it makes it simple.
So go ahead.
I was just thinking about the SOCI Act as well, and the sense of the work that I've undertaken for our organisation. We did focus very much on the risk register and building in the review of controls at a component level for the thing that we are looking after, plus the underpinning services and technology. So risk was a very central part of the SOCI work that we did. Just wanted to share that.
No, absolutely. And for us as well, in fact, the whole SOCI structure sits within our risk group, our group risk and compliance team. So they drive SOCI. And over the last, I don't know, year and a half or so, we've invested more by increasing the team. And as you can understand with AGL, we've got a lot of critical infrastructure across the land. And so we've got SOCI responsible people on site, as well as at corporate, sitting above the whole structure and process.
Yeah. We certainly have a similar requirement for parts of our organisation to be dedicated to that too.
Thank you for that. I'm just moving now through the next point. So material risk language from Jordan. And does anybody test your self-assessment for SOCI? So the testing, yeah. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, we've got a SOCI team. And so they do a self-assessment. In terms of material risk language, what do you mean? As in what defines a material risk?
So the SOCI Act has moved towards stating that you need to address material risk, which is kind of like a change of language from the normal risk language.
Got it.
So I was just wondering if you've had to readjust your approach to risk in alignment with this. But the other part about the self-assessment, I've always got I've got engineers who do self-assessment, that do their own work, and then I walk in and I tear it apart because they haven't holistically looked at the entire situation. Well, and they go, oh, well, I'm a structural engineer, not a fire engineer. And the fire engineer goes, well, I don't know enough about structural. What do you mean this firewall doesn't work? It's it's those gaps in between. And I just wonder if you do bring in externals to challenge and test your assumptions.
As far as I know, remember again, right? So I'm not part of the SOCI structure, as strange as it might sound. I don't think we bring in externals beyond running exercises. So we do have a program of exercises specifically structured to support, I guess, the business disruption response and SOCI as well. And so they're externals, and they're technical external experts that come and really deep dive into our world and come up with scenarios that are realistic, deep, and painful. And then we learn from those activities. I also mentioned that we do have a separation. We've got a corporate SOCI team, and then we've got localized SOCI team. So the corporate SOCI team will work with our site people and just make sure that we've got a nice overarching view on what they're doing and what they're saying. And as far as material risk language, I've been on board here for 2.25 years. And from the day I got on board, just thinking about the way risk management works here, they've always focused around material risk. And maybe that's because there's a very strong engineering flavor within AGL because we generate. So I haven't needed to see a change in language. We're already there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, don't do. Thank you.
You're welcome. We have one template for conducting BIRA. However, it's not clear that we base our risk assessment on. Should we base on the outcomes of BIRA? Well, so that's a good question. And certainly through my life of being a consultant, that's always created some angst in organizations. And even when I joined here, not going to tell too much out of school here, but when I joined here, there was a consequence matrix, which I was provided to say, here's what you can use for your BIA. And I looked and I said, well, this doesn't really suit the BIA conversation. And the BIA process and the BC process is a parallel process to risk. I don't want to make it a part of the risk process. So I justified all that, and we have 2 streams of activity that happens now done by 2 different groups of people. So when the organization is thinking about risks, they are thinking about it from a consequence of a threat materializing perspective. And when we're doing BC, we are looking at it purely from the impact on the business, on the ability to deliver a product and service when we have a disruption to a business process or to a product and service, regardless of why. And so it becomes very clear in our world that when we're talking risk, that's a very different construct to when we're talking BC. And within BC, as I described in that BIA session, we have a separate impact types table. So Daniela, not technically so. The question is, do we have 2 different consequence matrix? No, we have one consequence matrix and one impact matrix. And by design, I've rotated the impact matrix 90 degrees, so it goes the other way, just so visually it looks different, if you can picture that. And it's very clear, right? In the early days, I had to really push it to our senior leaders to say, this does not replace the risk framework, the consequence table in the risk framework. This is purely for the conversation around impact assessment. So when you do your risk assessment, which is a yearly thing, you'll continue to use the likelihood and consequence matrix, but in BC, we're using this impact table. And the categories themselves, while there is overlap, there are some categories, and the scale is very different as well. Right. So when we're thinking about, financial loss, for example, the financial loss scale on my impact table is a different scale to the financial consequence scale in the consequence matrix, because the conversation is different. So and that's by design, and that's working really well. Just picking up Wasim's question from an anonymous. Is it also proper to conduct RA before conducting BI? The standard actually says, the ISO says, it doesn't matter which order you do it in, right? That could be being politically correct there. My personal belief is it depends on what type of risk assessment you're doing. If you're doing a holistic risk assessment, then I reckon it should come first. If you're doing a risk assessment as a subset of your BC thinking, then I reckon it should come second. Why do I say that? I think if you're looking big picture, holistic risk management for the enterprise, I think it really is important to identify your biggest exposures and then identify whether you've got critical business processes or activities that that could be impacted by that, and then put business continuity in place. If it's the other way around, sometimes I find that doing the BIA helps us identify the most critical parts of the organization. At that point, you should have a subset of your organization, and then you can do a deep dive risk assessment on those critical parts of the organization. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think it just depends on the level of maturity or what your objective is in your risk assessment in relation to your BC program of work. So there are advantages in doing it either way. Okay, so should we move on to supply chain, Wasim? Any questions around supply chain? I think there are some complexities around that. And I think there should also be some consideration with supply chain and things like privacy and modern slavery. Privacy in terms of, you know, how does our information transfer to our suppliers? But more so about things like modern slavery and some of your other, you know, big picture policy issues. We have a very strong modern slavery policy at AGL. We do an extensive amount of research on suppliers. We try and go down to the second tier and even, well, second tier, yes, third tier if possible. Sometimes it's a real challenge though. I would like to think that as 22318 goes through its cycle for next time, that they put a little bit more content and considerations around those other elements. This is the worst applied consideration. An SLA is a sad response. I think it's I mean, you need to have an SLA, right, with your suppliers. I think, that's part of the relationship you have to put in place. What we did, again, one of the things that I did when I first joined was to look at our master agreements. So we have master agreements, whether it's with an IT service provider, an engineering company, or whatever, looked at those to look at what sort of continuity statements were in there. And that's changed now, right? So we have stronger wording and more clarity around that. It also puts the onus back on us to specify what BC SLA elements we want in there. So if we want a company to pick itself up after it has a disruption and we want it within 24 hours, we state that now because it's based on our BIA. So SLA is necessary evil, but I think we need to probably expand what we mean by SLA and put some more parameters around that from a BC perspective.
Of a shortfall. And sorry, I can't tell if I've lost connection or not because I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yep, cool. The companies that refill generators with diesel, a lot of them don't have generators at their own diesel pumping stations. So when people are going to be running on their generators because there's a power outage of a major element or so forth, they actually can't go and refill, or they can't actually get their staff to go out in inclement weather and so forth. And this was a shortfall for Gold Coast Hospital up in Queensland when Alfred wasn't actually a cyclone yet, but they actually could not get fuel delivered to them, and they were close to running low with a primary hospital. This is quite a concern to me when a post-disaster function is denied by somebody not actually having post-disaster function who's backing you.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you'd say, well, okay, we learned from that experience. We have to do a more in-depth, deep dive into our suppliers and look for alternate suppliers. Yeah, it's and that takes resources, right? So sometimes it's a challenge to find that out. But thanks for that example. It's a good example.
And so just a question on the same, on the supply chain, that pre-COVID or post-COVID, have you seen and more emphasis on fourth party, fifth party, not just the third party, and also on the stress exit that if one of your material vendor goes bankrupt.
You mean from an ISO perspective, what they've been thinking about?
No, like from planning perspective.
Oh, right. Okay. For us, we try and go as deep as we can, whether it's 3 or 4. But there's a challenge sometimes. From an ISO perspective, there was conversation about a year to a year and a half, 2 years ago, about not calling it supply chain continuity management as a principle, but to call it supply network resilience. Some people like it, some people don't like it, some people don't want significant change in these standards. I don't think it got much traction to change it. I can't remember off the top of my head when 318 is due for its systematic review, but we'll see then. From memory, 318, I think it's coming up next year. Actually, that process might kick off for 2026 into 2027. So who knows? Maybe with all the experiences that we've had, that will become a more significant issue to consider. And the way, again, ISO works is we have to have consensus on change. It requires more than just a 50% majority from the participating countries to say, yes, we want to make a change, and they have to agree on what that change is. So it's a bit of a process. So maybe it should be supply networks, right, to reflect the complexity, right, of the supply chain world, because chain tends to conjure up notions of linear relationships where we don't live in that world anymore.
All right. And any view on if they go bankrupt? I mean, because sometimes it's not really possible to have 2 vendors for this, but that's a challenge I think is that we have.
Yeah. So the question around that is, how quickly can you engage another organization? I mean, if you've got really short RTOs, there is a challenge. You have to flag that, as part of, your risk process, flag you have an exposure there. And I think every organization will suffer that. I mean, there are parts of our organization where we have single point dependencies, right? So we document it in our risk register, we make our executive and our board aware of it. And, should it come to pass that, we have a disruption that we don't have an immediate solution for, then we all understand what the ramifications are and we just have to work the problem. I think that's just reality. You just can't have continuity in everything.
Yeah, exactly. It's just mitigating the risk, not eliminating the risks, definitely.
Yeah.
Right. So we have 15 minutes left. So maybe if we move on to plans and procedures.
Plans and procedures, yeah. The message behind that one was to say, we need a variety of different documents. And again, through my consulting journey, there's always this push to say, we just want a plan. Just want a plan, Saul. Just write a plan. Go, well, do you want to plan for, your crisis response? Do you want to plan for your business recovery? You want to plan for, incident management? And then, you peel it open, you realize, well, yeah, we have different teams tasked with, different missions and need to be supported by different plans, whether it's a cyber response plan or a data breach response plan, they're all, specific documents with teams that sit behind it. So I don't think there were any great surprises there, but I think the key message was to say, don't write a plan first, define your teams and give them a mission, and then write a plan for the team. That may make it easier to work out what should go in the plan. So anybody have any feedback about their experience writing plans? That would be good to share with those who have joined us today. Anybody got an opinion about the structure of a plan? I think when I was talking about 22.332, I just gave an example that when I write a business recovery plan, my table of contents is about 1/3 of the way through the document, which sounds weird. And the reason why I do that is because the front cover says the name of the plan. Inside the front cover is 2 simple instructions. And then the next page gives you criteria on whether you should activate the team or not. Because I don't want people to read an introductory page and under whose authority is this plan and table of contents that I've got to flip through. People don't have time to do that when they're a bit stressed. So my structure is a little bit different. So Paul says, I agree, we have playbooks for various crisis scenarios separate to BC plans. Well, Paul, I agree. But what you've done, though, in your message, though, you just separate the notion of crisis from disruption. And I think that is a good way of thinking. That's the way I think about it. Because, crisis means a variety of different things. It's not just about a disruption. And so I think you need to have a crisis plan that in some ways covers a variety of different scenarios, and maybe even make it scenario agnostic, so it covers anything that threatens an organization's viability or its integrity.
So, Saul, we have a question from Paul. I copied that in the chat.
Yeah. So the movement to cloud services and AI as a service solution seems to mean that we all have a greater risk around connectivity and SPOF for complex service delivered by those suppliers. What are the options for improving awareness for those risks, supply chain BCPs? Well, I think in all cases, in terms of making them aware, is you get them on the risk register. And as an example, I think that I mentioned when we were talking about resilience, right? I have a regular meeting with my counterpart in the risk team where we just share information. And so as these sort of things come up, we're sharing information. And if it's significant enough, then they put it in the risk register, we allocate it ownership to someone, and then, we decide how we're going to deal with that. That can also influence your strategies, but it also highlights that you might have a gap. But I think the biggest important factor around this is that you make people aware. We don't want surprises. Daniela, I definitely agree with having different plans and procedures. We're currently in the process of developing a set of procedures for frontline teams to follow. Yeah, we've got scripts. Our frontline teams have scripts. Some of those scripts are templated, but we also hook in, depending on the nature, the severity, the velocity of a disruption. We also hook in our corporate affairs team to write bespoke messaging, when needed. The comment you made about asking for facts and information about the teams before building the plans really resonates, makes much more sense. Helps. Yeah, I think you need, like exercise, right? You need to set your objective first, and then you design your scenario around that. In all cases, right? Set your objective, set your BC objective, right? And then, set the objective for a team, and then the plan comes after that. Makes life a lot easier. All right. David, my structure to plan on a page. Right, links. Yep, this comes title page. Yeah, so if that works for your clients, Dave, then that is fantastic. I think that also is reflective of the maturity of the organization. Some organizations can't work with a plan on a page. And I understand that yours, as you said here, has hyperlinks, which is great, with more explicit instructions. Some people like everything in one document. I think the benefit of what you're describing is the maintenance side of things. So if you've got a plan on one page that talks about the principles of responding and decision making, then that's great. And then you've got your hyperlinks off to other documents with the content which might suffer more change than your plan on a page. So about finding the right balance. And I think what you've described, makes sense to me. We're not quite there yet. Maybe over time, we can incorporate something like that too. And I'd say it's probably on a case-by-case basis, right? Some parts of my business, like a document with everything in it. And I already know that there are some people who have reference documents out on SharePoint or up in the cloud that they will hook out to anyway.
And just to add a bit on this one, Saul, I benchmarked like few years back, maybe 15 years back, 2 Australian major banks, and then major banks, I would say, without naming them. And one had a one-pager, A3, and the other one is so detailed. So they both were happy with what their approach is, but then I got to know about one of the bank that had the one pager. Later they changed to a detailed one. But maybe it might be good to have both versions. But again, of course, the maintenance would be tedious. But then maybe one pager you can use during a crisis. Again, it all depends, how you want to approach it. But then I have practically seen these both approaches with the two major banks.
I think the litmus test is run an exercise, with those who have pages of plan and see if they actually follow the plan.
Yeah.
Right. Or is it too detailed and it takes too much time to read? I know an exercise is not real life. It's usually an accelerated time frame, but to what extent do they use a thick document? I think, might resonate around the depth of that. So many plans have not so many people make up team membership, for instance, head of it's a lot for one person. Yeah, I agree. And so I have struggled at times finding good membership for recovery teams. I kind of demand a primary and at least 2 alternates. Sometimes that's a challenge for small teams, but you can only work with what you've got. Paul says maybe Gen AI to get those one-page summaries might be an option sometime soon. Yeah, it's funny. I've tried to use AI, ChatGPT 5 and a few others to design various BC assets. I'm still ambivalent over the benefit of doing that. I haven't been happy with the results. I got it to design some exercises. I took to the subject matter experts in AGL and they go, yeah, that would have worked well 5 years ago, but we have new technology today that that could never happen for us. So I guess you've got to put it in context and do your research. Now we've only got a few minutes left, so maybe a quick touch on resilience policy and strategy. If anyone's got any questions or comments about resilience, do you have resilience policies in your organizations? Are they very high level? Are they low level? What's it mean for your organization? I'd be very keen to hear how other people are developing resilience policies. And also, are you differentiating between organization resilience and operational resilience? Okay. So a few people are responding they don't have a policy yet. That's okay, neither do we. We have a business continuity policy, a risk management policy, not a resilience policy, even though I'm senior manager of business resilience. I think it's one of these things that we still have a challenge in defining what it means. And even if we could define it as a policy and we followed this standard 22336 to come up with a strategy, I think there's still a lot to get our head around in terms of what it actually means and what that strategy means and how we would implement it. And maybe we'll get a bit more guidance when 22316 gets published next year. So Daniel says, our resilience policy as such is wrapped up in strategy and enterprise risk. Yeah, so I think that is a common thing. I wonder whether there is sufficient clarity, in those statements around resilience that help people understand that resilience actually is different to risk. It's different to business continuity. And that maybe it's an overarching construct. We often have conversations here about where resilience should sit in the whole scheme of things. Should resilience be within risk? Should risk be within resilience? We continue to argue that. Of course, risk people think everything should come under risk. People like me, Resilience BC, have a different, perspective. So it's hard to write policy when not everybody's on the same page, as it were. But that'll change. We'll continue to think it through and apply it to our real world within the organization. And then when we're ready, we'll write a policy. And of course, we'll take it to our board and we'll make sure they understand what we mean by resilience and the difference between org resilience and operational resilience. And then hopefully we'll be in a better place. All right, so a couple of minutes to go. Just reading the last couple of comments here. So Dave says, I'm sure people don't understand it. And like you, I'm in the business resilience. Yeah, you're a business resilience specialist. That's good, Dave. And hopefully it's not too much of a challenge to help people understand what that means, right? And I know you, Dave. I know you bring in a balance between risk, BC, supply chain, ITDR, which I know you're very strong in. Well, I shouldn't call it DR, right? Resilience, we'll call it resilience or continuity. So you bring a very good blend, and I think conceptually a very good blend is what resilience, is all about. From Jesse, thank you so much for conducting. Oh, you're very welcome. Well, look, the mission for this series of presentations is really to help people understand a little bit more about where ISO fits in your world or could fit in your world. It was never designed to say, it's got to replace the good practice guide. The strong message from Wasim and from me is to say, use them hand in hand. Good practice guide is for a practitioner view of the world. Standards is an organization view of the world. I think there's real benefit in blending the two together. I find in all my consulting world, and certainly at AGL, the moment I start talking in terms of saying we are going to align with ISO, I don't get argument. And how I align to ISO actually is through the good practice guide. So that's how I blend the two together. And this series was really meant to help you understand, the ISO landscape, the relationship between the standards, the philosophy within those standards, and hopefully, make you think that, well, hopefully you'll take on board that there is benefit at looking at standards and that your organization is happy to buy those standards. Not that I have any financial interest at all. Remember, I'm a volunteer. I don't take any financial benefit out of being a member of the ISO world. It's all voluntary. So thank you for that feedback. We really appreciate it.
I think it's about time. So I think I would like to conclude to say thank you, Saul, for all the efforts and the time that you put in. It's definitely takes a lot from you, and I think it was very, very valuable for all of us, including me. And thanks everyone for participating in these webinars, because you all participated and then you all encouraged us to continue, and then maybe in future we might have more similar sessions, maybe on the same.
That's true.
So yeah, good luck in your business continuity and resilience journey. And hopefully we'll find the clear difference between the two.
Indeed. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.